Hello and welcome back to the County Chat previews for 2025. I say they're previews at this point, of course, the season has started, but we kind of be looking at the outlook of any county going through the 2025 season. And we're up to 5th place from last year. Finishing in 5th place was the county in the Town Championship last year, is the most northern county. Home to the only ground with a double-barrelled name and the home of England's Test captain. It is, of course, Durham, whose home is, of course, Chesterley Street. Durham, going into the 2025 season, are coached by a very proven coach in Ryan Campbell. He's been an international coach for a few years before this, before he took over Durham, and was at the helm for their promotion to Division 1 in 2023, and has been a big part of their sort of establishment into Division 1, and, looking like a really good side in 2025. He now has a new Red Bull captain, though. Alex Lees is taking over from Scott Borthwick, who's sort of maybe sliding into a bit more of a player-coach role, really, later on in his career, because he wasn't staying in the team, maybe with selection, but he sort of bowed out, and to let Alex Lees take over. Alex Lees was already the white ball captain, so it kind of works quite well, and he clearly already seen as a leader within their group, and I think, with his England days looking probably behind him at this point, he's sort of a perfect, he's a proven run scorer, one of your best players in your team, and clearly a leader within the dressing room. So I think he seems like a perfect leader for Durham, and it'll be interesting to see how he goes as the captain in 2025. Durham went into the 2025 season, as one of the dark horses to dethrone Surrey. I think everyone was looking for a team, or teams for that matter, who sort of had a chance to take away the current three-peaters to having a potential four-peat, and Durham were definitely a team that people were looking at. Though, unfortunately, they have had a sort of less than ideal start. They find themselves in 8th place after a convincing loss at Trent Bridge and a sort of nail-biting loss to Warwickshire at Chesterley Street. It is sort of an interesting one. I think they had those close losses. I think personally, they played at Trent Bridge against early season, I think the best bowling unit in the country, especially with Fergus Neal at the head of it. And then, lost a very close game at Chesterley Street, which was, they played an aggressive approach. They declared with a score which could definitely be chaseable on that day 4 pitch, and they lost by 1 wicket, and they kind of rolled the dice and it didn't come up for them. But I sort of respect their aggressive approach, which is kind of Ryan Campbell, and I think Alex Lees' philosophy, obviously, who was one of the sort of starters of Bazball, so I guess he'll probably still have that leftover mindset on playing cricket games. Anyway, I'm still on the bandwagon for 2025. They've just come off a low scoring win at New Road against Worcestershire, who I just previewed. So I think Durham are looking, they're not in probably the best place they would want to be, but I think they're looking like they're on the swing up, and I think their batting unit for me is one of the best in the country. I think their weakness is in their bowling unit. So it'll be interesting to see how they pan out over a full season, but Durham has had a lot of changes in its sort of early 2025. So as I say, we usually start with our weakness. So I say usually, we always start with our weakness of the sort of the county and seeing, where they might be getting better or trying to get better. And I wrote a bit of this before the kind of early season signings that Durham have made, but the bowling lineup is a key area of weakness or a need for bolstering throughout the season. As we'll get on to, they've done a lot of bolstering already, so it'll be interesting to see how that continues in 2025. Anyway, starting with the sort of leader of the bowling unit, it is Matthew Potts. He's a hell of a bowler to be able to give the new ball to. He's really, really impressive. I think he's impressed to all English fans in the last sort of 5 or 4 years, maybe, around county cricket and his forays into the Test arena. He bowls fast with a heavy ball and is skillful enough to make use of these talents and take wickets. He is kind of this sort of old-fashioned fast bowler. What I think people like a lot about him is he's angry, he's a bit angry, he's very competitive, always in the contest, and he always runs in so hard. He's always very happy to put his body through the ringer, really bowl the overs, bowl 30 in a day or whatever it might need for the team. I think he's always willing to do it. In 8 matches last year, he took a very healthy total of 33 wickets at an average of 25. So if Durham have him for a full season, because that was only in 8 matches, he could be pushing those wicket tallies into the 40s and into the 50s perhaps. Though I think the issue for Durham is the fact that he is so good that, especially with some of the sort of fast bowling injuries that England have had, I think he could well be moving back into the England Test team throughout the summer, or maybe points this summer, or being in the squad, which would kind of be the worst of both worlds for Durham. there's plenty of injuries. It's sort of like his Durham compatriots in Mark Wood and Bryden Cast, but then also Ollie Stone from Nottinghamshire, and there's a bit of a, well, I guess it's always the case with fast bowlers, but there's often a bit of quite a lot of turnover with injury. But yeah, Potts will definitely be one of the sort of early favourites maybe to sneak into the England side. But if he were to be moved into the England side, I think Durham's bowling unit would be looking quite short-staffed, and it'd be a bit of a worrisome moment for them. But opening the bowling with him, I think, is a sort of perfect sort of fire and ice combination. I'd say is Ben Raine. Ben Raine is sort of a very consistent performer for Durham over the years. He's a brilliant bowling all-rounder. His sort of economical medium pace with just brilliant skills and consistency means he's just, as I say, sort of a perfect combination for the bit more of the faster and maybe a bit more erratic but player in Matthew Potts. But yeah, last year Ben Raine probably had less of a bit of a down year really for him, and I think that's more to how good and consistent he has been over the years. But he took 32 wickets at an average of 29. And yeah, he would definitely be looking to sort of bring that, that bowling average a bit more close to his career of bowling averages of 26, and I think he's been as far down as 25. But yeah, he's on track to do that, and very much doing that at the moment, because he is being one of the best bowlers in the county championship over the first 3 rounds. He's taken 19 wickets, which is second place in all of the county Division 1 at an average of 23. Also, the person in first place is Fergus O'Neill, who, as I've mentioned already in this preview, but he's not going to be there for the whole season for Nottinghamshire, and I would say is almost an international calibre fast bowler. So, I think that Ben Raine's sort of upswing in form and real looking like unbelievably good with the ball, I think is a really important thing for Durham. If he can have a full season, get up towards 50 wickets, I think, Durham could be really, really keeping that title charge alive. But that, I think, is where the bowling is a strength. If that was your bowling unit and you had more depth, it would 100% be a strength. But that is where the trouble lies for Durham, I think, is it in their change bowling, and they've tried to address it. They really have. Durham have signed Brendan Doggett for sort of the early part of this season. He was a South Australian fast bowler. Well, he is a South Australian fast bowler. He wasn't. He was a large part of their South Australia sort of ending of their long drought of Sheffield Shield. Lack of winning it, basically, and they won it this winter. He's looked impressive, and he's in the sort of form of his life following that summer in Australia. He's looked impressive, but not world beating compared to, again, brought up Fergus O'Neill for the third time, compared to his compatriot Fergus O'Neill. But I think maybe in his last performances for the county, he'll look to really add to his 9 wickets he's got so far. He's only in the county for May. I don't know if it's until May or sort of through May, because obviously we're getting to May now. So it'll be interesting to see, how he does, and if he continues to do well. But his start has not been anything to maybe write home about in a literal sense. So yeah, but the thing about the bolstering throughout the season, which I mentioned at the top of the sort of the bowling script, if you will, is that they've with the injury of David Beddingham, who's one of their batters, Durham have acted very quickly, and an injury of a lot of their seam bowlers as well. But they've signed Cody Youssef, another South African who's coming off his best season domestically, being a part of the Lions team that shared the 2025 CSA Trophy. He'll be available for 6 matches, including his debut at New Road, and he certainly landed on his feet in New Road, making use of a very seamer-friendly pitch, and he took match figures of 6 for 62. The other sort of emergency signings were the loan moves and the 2-week loan moves of Jake Ball and Jack Blatherwick, JB. The former was just an inspired signing to get him in there before New Road, because he's the sort of perfect bowler for a real green seamer like that. It was Jake Ball took 5 wickets in the first innings and then was on the way to match figures of 7 for 74, which obviously is a very impressive start. Blatherwick was also featured in that game and is a very highly touted bowler from Lancashire. A little bit younger, a little less proven, probably less maybe skillful, but not that he isn't skillful, but just compared to Jake Ball. And he didn't take a wicket in that fixture and didn't bowl in the second innings when they just focused on, I think it was Ball, Raine and Youssef bowled all the overs. I think what is interesting about this, and I think what is telling about this, is the quick action from Marcus North and the Durham sort of leadership group. I think it shows real, real like mindset and intent to compete at the top of the table with sort of a plethora of injuries throughout their lineup and their bowling lineup. they've gone, we're not going to shut it down for the season, or we're not going to just play young players maybe that they could pull up from the second 11. They've gone, we're going to go out and really sign players who we know are proven performers and that could do really well. And I think that kind of mindset, and not a mindset switch, but I think it's a mindset sort of bolstering. It shows Durham is like, we're in win now. We think we can win with this team. I think we can win the championship, and they've gone out and signed players, used the money, and I think that can really help the sort of mindset within a team. You think, we're bringing in all these lone players, like we're really in this, and we're really wanting to challenge. And of course, every year you want to challenge, but it's sort of actions speak louder than words, as they say. And I think those kind of actions of signing players on the short-term deals and paying the money to do that is really, really a good sign for Durham. And, before the season, they were very aggressive in trying to sign, players to fill this sort of perceived lack of depth in their bowling unit. And it was the signing of someone like Sam Connors from Derbyshire. He's a very talented fast bowler who sort of, I think, with the right tutelage and maybe in a winning team, because he's been at Derbyshire, who's been one of the worst teams of recent years, he could have a season and seasons far better than his career bowling average of 37. I think he's one of those players that I think, the right tutelage is kind of the word. It's as a, Durham have a plethora of great fast bowlers that have come out of there. I've used plethora a lot, I'm just realising. They've had a lot of bowlers who've come out of there, seam bowlers, and I think they've got the sort of the bowling coaches and the sort of expertise. I know Graham Onions is up there as a bowling consultant or coach, that they can kind of bring the best out of these proper quick bowlers. Because I think, that's the thing about Sam Connors. He might not be as skillful as others, but he's got that kind of raw speed. And two of the sort of injured bowlers who were already in the sort of Durham ranks, but they got injured early this season, who I were looking to be that kind of fourth seamer, maybe third seamer when Doggett went home, is Paul Coughlin and Daniel Hogg. Coughlin is a 32-year-old. His ability to bat has been really helped him in previous years. He's got a sort of a batting average in the sort of mid to high 20s, whilst having a bowling average in the low 30s. So he's kind of a bowling all-rounder, really. And I think, if he can return from injury quickly, he's the kind of obvious selection, I think, for Durham for being that third and fourth seamer, because of, again, helped by his batting. Though, he has been hit by the injury bug quite a lot, and obviously he's 32, and it's sort of like, how much can you still be getting out of him? We will wait and see when he comes back from injury, I guess. And then, Hogg, who's kind of the younger of the two options. He's a 20-year-old. He had a brilliant season last year. He took 12 wickets at an average of 23. And and Durham will know and hope that he's sort of going to be a big name for them going into the future. So I think they'll probably be a bit more conservative with his rehab. I don't know what the injury actually is. I couldn't find it when I was doing the research for this video. So whether how they'll sort of handle those two injuries will be interesting. And again, they'll hope they can come back this season and be a big part of the sort of title push later on into the season. Now, quick disclaimer, I am fully aware that Mark Wood, Bryden Cast, Ben Stokes all play for Durham and in theory could be available for Durham, but I think for 2025 season, I think it is fair to say they are probably an irrelevance. I think maybe not Bryden Cast. I think he has a potential to come back from that broken toe is, very possible. But, toe injuries for fast bowlers can often be a lot more techie than it might on the first look seem, if you will. But I think for the most part, the bowlers we've mentioned so far are kind of going to be the ones who, the seam bowlers, I say, will be the ones that kind of are the main, battery of quicks, if you will, for the 2025 season. I think, I think it's the depth you worry about, especially if Potts is brought into that England side, which I think is very possible. But I think Marcus North's sort of quick action, I think, will prove to be a masterstroke. I think his ability to sort of say, this is a problem, let's fix it, because I think this team is good enough to win now, I think is a really, really, proactive and positive move from the sort of management. And as I say, I think it backs a kind of mindset side of the game, which I think is a big one in cricket, especially over the 4-day format, in my opinion. An aspect of the bowling that I think is really worrisome, and I think it's an incredibly hard thing to bolster, perhaps compared to other things, is the lack of an exceptional spinner. Callum Parkinson is the only spinner they have who's probably had a full season of being a spinner, if that makes sense, or full season of being their sort of frontline spinner. And last year it was a tough one. He took 30 wickets, which would seem decent, but it was at a bowling average of 53. And his career is already, career average is already pretty high, but this was 13 runs higher than that per wicket. He has a career average of 40. So I think he hasn't been selected so far this year. So whether or not they're kind of looking at it like, that's perhaps he's only someone who's going to play when they think it's going to be a real spinning wicket, maybe later in the season at Taunton or at the Oval or places like that. But I think for the most part, I guess they will look at Chesley Street and know it's more of a ground that is often suited fast bowling, and think we don't need a spinner who's going to be effective. But I think it really went against them when they went to Trent Bridge. They picked George Drissel, who's sort of a bowling all-rounder, bowls off spin, and he played at Nottinghamshire, and he really struggled. He bowled quite a lot of overs, it took match figures of 1 wicket for 150 runs, which, needless to say, is not really going to do you much good as a bowling unit if your spinner is doing that. And Colin Ackerman, another a part of the batting unit who we'll talk about a lot later. He's a part-time off spinner, bowls has always bowled pretty serviceable off spin, but his bowling averages for his career, which is long enough to really ascertain his value, I'd say I think are in the high 40s, and it's like to my eye he's just not good enough to be the only option for a team if they weren't going to pick Drissel or Parkinson. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how that goes and whether or not they can get anyone on a loan signing or whatever it might be. They haven't done anything so far, so whether or not they'll be just looking at it like we're going to play with 4 seamers or 5 seamers comparatively, and use Ackerman if needs must, sort of thing. But it'll be interesting. I think this is maybe the gap in the bowling unit, which I think is maybe a reason why Durham's not quite to the title charge definite yet. I'm on that bandwagon, but I would say if you're looking from a sort of maybe trying to be from that objective point of view of being like, what does Surrey have perhaps that they don't? And Surrey have a very similar, attitude, as they really focus on having exceptional seam bowlers. I just think their seam bowlers have more depth and there's more of them. Because, they use Dan Lawrence really as their sort of frontline spinner. Who I also think is better than probably all 3 options that we've just been mentioning. But it's that kind of lack or that kind of gap, I guess you'd say, in their team, which I think is really... is a big part of why Durham might be not quite to the level yet. I just don't think I just don't think their seam bowling unit is good enough, like Surrey's is, to kind of get away with not having a frontline spinner, if that makes sense. Drissel is also valued for his batting, which we'll get on to now. That's sort of the bowling aspect done. But speaking of batting, that is the real reason I think Durham is a dark horse for 2025. They did take a real dent. I think, it's the time to talk about it. But David Beddingham, he fractured his toe, and it will take him out of action, I think, for at least 6 weeks. And that was how Cricket South Africa were looking at it, and how Durham are looking at it. He stayed in Durham for his rehab, which is a very good sign for Durham that he's going to, he's very much committed to the season. And I guess, whether or not it's just a part of his contract, I guess it probably would be. But with the World Test Championship final looming, you would have maybe worried if he'd head off, but he didn't. He's staying around the county, which is a really positive thing, I think, for Durham. Yeah, and I really hear usually a batsman getting an injury for a portion of the season is maybe not a monumental moment, but I think genuinely Beddingham might be that exception. Since joining Durham, he's just been a revelation and a real driving force in their success. It did feel for a while and still does now whenever you check a Durham scorecard that he's got runs. It is kind of as simple as that. Since joining in 2020, he's scored 4,296 runs at an average of 58. People might have worried if he could only do it at Division 2, because I think when you saw him play at Division 2, he was so clearly above that level. But then, in the first full year, last year in Division 1, he was the Division 1 leading scorer, scored 1,331 runs at an average of 78. So if anything, Division 1 sort of brought even more out of him, even perhaps better out of him. So I think it was, he's a hugely talented talented stuff. He's one of the best sort of prospects of, before he had made his debut, it was like, when is South Africa going to pick him? And he is now a big part of that South African team, which is part of the World Test Championship final. And I think he is a really important part to Durham's success. So his injury is a big thing to sort of try and replace. But I think Durham have the batters to do it, and that's what we'll be getting onto now. So the openers is the ever consistent and now captain Alex Lees. I think he could talk about Lees for a long time. But we'll sort of talk about him and his batting companion at the top of the order is the young starlet Ben McKinney. The Southpaw pair sort of epitomise the style of cricket that Durham want to play. They're both aggressive batters by nature, and especially Lees has kind of turned his game around, because he wasn't kind of known for that, and then now having been sort of, as I've written here, one of the frontier men for Bazball, he sort of, since coming back to domestic cricket, has really dominated. I mean, last year probably wasn't his most dominant he had been, but he still scored 924 runs at an average of 46. The year before that, I think, was particularly big. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was well above 1,000. So yeah, McKinney is a name that's kind of come to prominence over the course of the winter, really, if you're a Badger like me. Went on the England Lions tour to Australia over the winter, and he had a fairly successful tour. And sort of the highlight of it being he scored a belligerent runner ball 110 at Sydney. He's got real talent, and he scored runs, and he's in his sort of 15 matches, I think his career batting average is still is around 40, and I think he scored a couple of hundreds and had a few 50s, including that 100 in Sydney. So I think he's someone they'll look at, and he's one of those players where I think when he is at his best, he's dominating. He's a big guy. He hits the ball really hard. Big lofty praise to say, but he kind of looks almost a bit Matthew Hayden-esque. He's sort of a big, strong set left-handed batsman who's got great technique alongside it. So again, Durham will be kind of looking, he's going to, I think, will play the full season. He's only 20, and I think his talent levels are super high, and his ceiling is super high, but I think he's already at a level where I think he'll have a very successful year this year. So their opening batting, I think that duo, I think, is as maybe not as good as it gets, but right up there. Probably predominantly at 3 for this season is the new signing, Emilio Gay. He had a lone stint at the club at the end of last year from Northamptonshire and made the move permanent. He looks in great touch. I've always been a big fan of Emilio Gay. I think he was always a lot better than Division 2. And he's moved on from Northamptonshire to Durham. And he had a good start to the season and scored an incredibly stylish 152 against Yorkshire early in this season. In that draw, which happened very recently. I think he's a great signing, not only for this season, but I think for the years going forward. I think he's 24, 25. And I think when he's at his best, he looks every part of a Division 1 player. And as we know with batters, you kind of just tend to just be upping your skill level until maybe your mid-30s. But I think he's got a lot of years left to give Durham a serious amount of runs, really, basically. As I said about Bedingham, he would usually be at 4. I've already waxed lyrical about him. I think we know, when he comes into the team, how big of a part of the team he is for Durham and how kind of consistent and great he is. In the games he's been absent, though, Colin Ackerman, who's batting 5 usually, has moved into that 4 spot. I think the Dutch international, he's one of those players you can really pencil in for sort of 800 runs to 1,000 runs any season. He's really he set the tone for his season very early on, as he got hundreds in both innings in that loss against Nottinghamshire. And again, I think it's that dueling 100 dueling 100 match was even more impressive given how Nottinghamshire's bowling unit has looked sort of ever since, and even during that game. It was against Nottinghamshire at Trent Bridge, and those bowlers have been looking seriously good to start the year. But Colin Ackerman, batted beautifully. He hasn't scored many runs since, but I think everyone would be safe to say that Colin Ackerman is one of those, you know what you're going to get, and he's a quality player. Following on from him, Durham, I think, probably have one of the best wicketkeeper batsmen in the country, in Ollie Robinson. His signing from Kent a few years ago, I think, was when I was really getting into my county cricket, and I remember thinking that seems like a good signing. The numbers that Ollie Robinson had put together for Kent, amongst some, a bag of opportunities with Sam Billings and Jordan Cox there at the time. But, it's proven the case ever since that how good of a signing that was. I genuinely think if it wasn't for, Jordan Cox, Ben Foakes and Jamie Smith, sort of the Surrey pair of Foakes and Smith particularly, I think he'd be well within the England setup and playing games. But the 26-year-old will sort of be hoping he can break into that team. But after he's had a pretty slow start to the 2025 season, but he had an unbelievably good season in 2024 for a sort of wicketkeeper batsman, batting last year mostly at 6, scoring 871 runs at an average of 48. I mean, it's just, those are exceptional numbers for a wicketkeeper who is also known for his wicketkeeping skill, particularly as in behind the stumps with the gloves. I think he is known as very well. I've always said with these, I'm no wicketkeeping expert, so I'm never going to comment too much, but I think, to my understanding, people who know more about it than me have good words to say about his keeping abilities. Another signing who's a batter who I think has just supplemented what is already a strength for Durham is Will Rhodes. He's coming off an 1,000-run season last year, and I think it was just a masterstroke signing, as I've written here. It's a batting all-rounder who he joined out from Warwickshire. He's been a part of the last team that wasn't, Surrey. He was the captain of the team that wasn't a Surrey team that won the county championship in 2021. And I think his leaving was a real reason I thought the Bears might struggle in 2025. He's a good player. I've written here, a player good enough to bat in your top three, which he has done for Warwickshire for the last 4 years, and also be one of your seamers, of probably your fourth seamer, is very, very rare. And he has that ability to do both, and he's done that for a while. I think Durham's strength at the top of the order is probably meaning he'll probably bat consistently around 6, or maybe a bit higher now. Beddingham's out with injury, but his versatility I think is something that any team would cherish throughout a long season. As I said, he scored that 1,000-run season last year, and he's had a few of them. He sort of averages high 30s, and he's just a very, very good player to have in your setup, in my view. And and especially with Beddingham, who's going to be out for a sort of extended period of time, I think his runs are going to be really, really valuable. I didn't mention his bowling during our sort of bowling bit of the preview, but his ability to be a sort of fourth seamer, fifth seamer is quite important for Durham, or very important for Durham even. Lastly, sort of the last batter I'd say of note for Durham is Graham Clark. He's a bit of a peculiarity in cricket. I've always quite enjoyed seeing his career in many ways, but he's consistently for Durham in recent years batted 7 as a specialist batter, doesn't bowl at all, and had a pretty lean year in 2024, averaging 23. And again, having seen the signings of Emilio Gay and Will Rhodes, I think for me and probably a lot of others, it seemed a bit more of a foregone conclusion that Graham Clark might sort of shift into a role of I guess you'd say sort of a part of the squad and maybe come in and out of the team when players went for international duty or whatever it might be. But he's kind of stayed a key member of the squad. And again, to use that David Beddingham's injury, people need to step up. But I think he is one of those players where if he can really perform when Beddingham's gone, I think it will really cement his place in this Durham side. Whereas again, as I say, he did have a tough year in 2024. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how he does. And I think that was a key thing for Durham going forward. As I said, Drissel, who's the bowling all-rounder, that spinner, I think he really impressed in their pre-season tour in Zimbabwe. And again, in the wake of a lot of injuries, he'll hope he can get a little more games going on. I don't know how consistent he will be. I also think, just as an aside, the pre-season tour in Zimbabwe was a really clever move from Durham. They're playing Zimbabwe A in pre-seasons, which I think is a really cool, not only a good experience for you on the pitch, but I think off the pitch and going on a pre-season tour, it's probably just good to get all the players sort of together in many ways, especially with some new signings. Another sort of bowling all-rounding talent is Bastilleida, or I think he's probably more of a batting all-rounder. I guess maybe you just say he's an all-rounder. Another Dutch international. He's probably more of a white ball threat, or kind of consistently in the white ball side, but his red ball averages are great. I mean, he's got a batting average of 33 and a bowling average of 35, which is just very solid numbers for an all-rounder. So it'll be interesting to see if Bastilleida ever sort of gets into the team. I guess he's another Dutch international, so whether or not it's sort of an eligibility thing as much as anything. But yeah, Ben Rain, as I mentioned, sort of how effective he is as a bowler, but he's, definitely would be seen as a bowling all-rounder, and he's got some real ability with the bat. I think he averaged in the 30s last year with 3 or 4 50s, which is, very good numbers to get around 400 runs as a sort of 8 or 9 batter is really important. And speaking of, bowlers who can bat quite a bit, is Matthew Potts. I mean, he scored 149 whilst night watchmaning last year. And Bryden Cast, when he comes back, he's a batting, I would say he probably falls into the bowling all-rounder sort of strategy. But yeah, both with the ability, they've scored hundreds last year, so I think they're both really important for the lower order batting for Durham. Anyway, overall, I feel, as I've alluded to throughout the video, I think Durham are in a great position for a title challenge this year. I think in the off-season they were really aggressive and effective with the signings of Emilio Gay and William Rhodes. And I think not only those pre-season signings and people like Brendan Doggett and Sam Connors, but it was also when they've had this injury bug, the Marcus North and the leadership group, as I've mentioned, were just super active and able to go out and get some signings. And Cody Youssef, Jake Ball and Jack Blatherwick were really, really important. I think it shows that kind of win now mindset, which I think is a really important thing. And I think it's a really important sort of mindset to be in, and a really valuable thing for a team looking to challenge is kind of getting the backing from your backroom staff. I think it is kind of the case of it will be the depth of the bowling lineup. I think the batting unit is well good enough to put Durham in position to win games. I think it is the bowling, and more specifically the lack of a real frontline spinner, or maybe even a spinner that they just have confidence in, I think could be the detriment for Durham in 2025. But using the word detriment, I feel like is sort of an overstatement, because it's a detriment to like why they might not win the league, which is for a team which was promoted only 2 years ago, I think is a really amazing position to be in. I think Durham are well on their way for sustained success. And yeah, with how Marcus North is running the club, I think Durham, are in a really good position. Durham, as well as, have always had a superb academy, and I think people like Ben McKinney coming through really shows that, and Daniel Hogg or whatever. And it's always been a hotbed for talent in England. I mean, that's still the case now, and in our setup. But coupling that with signing probably two of the best available players in the country in Will Rhodes and Emilio Gay, I think you don't need to be sort of a cricketing genius to work out that's a sort of a recipe for success. And yeah, as I sort of alluded to, but it's the place I lived for 3 years whilst at university up at Durham. And I think, the passion for cricket, I played cricket up there, wearing my Hilton shirt, the lads from Sunderland. The passion for cricket and the passion for the county really shows there. They all are really interested in how they're doing, which I think is kind of the reason I've done this channel, is it's that kind of passion is not as seen a lot around the country. So I think, if their team starts doing really well, there will be this kind of momentum around the county, and that people really want them to do well. So I think that will be one of those things. I think once it gets going, there'll be a hard team to beat, and Chesley Street might have more and more people coming to watch them, and having a little more passion around it, which I think Durham has that passion for the team to do well, and they always want their team to do well, and they're always looking out for it. I think, the timely return of Starman Beddingham, I think is an obvious focus for Durham. I think it's an obvious, if you can get someone as good as David Beddingham back for the end of the season, he can really push you potentially towards a title charge and a title push right at those end of the season when it gets a little bit, squeaky bum time. I think, I've said a lot, but I think Durham will do very well this year. Enough said. It's kind of finish off this thing. I just think Durham are in a great position. I think no matter what they do and no matter how they've done it, they've done all the right things. They've made the right decisions, and they've doubled down on believing in themselves. Anyway, so thank you very much for watching. That has been our preview of Durham here at the County Chat. There should be some playlists for some of the videos we've already made for previews of other counties. So we've only got 4 left, so they'll be coming out in the coming weeks. Sort of pushing how much of a preview it is now. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you watched to this point, why not give it a like? Why not give it a subscribe? All those YouTubey things. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and cheers.